The story goes back a few years ago when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day I'd walk the 25 or 30-minute journey to and from school. There was a shortcut I could take home, and that took some time off the walk. And as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable. Whenever I'd walk home alone, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest we had in the medium-sized, moderately busy city I lived in. My shortcut was pretty well traveled, and I would occasionally see other people walking from their neighborhood towards the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from my high school or the college. Sometimes there would be no one but me on the path. To give you an idea, the path definitely was not groomed, but it was traveled enough you could make out a path from being trampled over the years. The shortcut started off from a busy road by my high school and went into a low-lying, open, wooded area with some small ponds. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up the big hill towards the street parallel to my street. One day, I was walking home from school after staying a bit late for extra help. A few minutes into my shortcut, I noticed a guy standing off the main path a bit, seemingly minding his own business and talking on a cell phone. There was an open backpack sitting on the ground by his feet. Growing up with overprotective parents and in martial arts, I have always been a very cautious person and take in a lot of details, especially being a young girl walking alone. This wasn't unusual by any means, since the low-lying area is traveled and there are numerous paths off the main path leading different directions. Since it isn't a thick forest, sort of like a free-for-all walking, sometimes people would stand off the busy road while waiting for the bus stop close by, not wanting to stand in all the traffic fumes while people sped by during rush hour. The only thing I took caution of was that I had been seeing him there for a few times a week, and had never seen him before, but oh well, maybe he was a college student or just moved into the area. This time, walking on the shortcut felt different though, possibly because there was no one else on the path today. But I started to get this bad feeling in my stomach, the one everyone has a hard time describing, but most people know too well. Something was not right. I was already well along my shortcut though, and I decided to blame my feelings on me being paranoid, which is not uncommon for me. I kept an eye on him out of my peripheral vision, walking by, and he continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious, so I continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters when the guy stopped talking on the phone, and I felt an even bigger of dread on my gut. I turned around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth and brown glass bottle. Before I had a second to register what the fuck he was doing, his head shoots up in my direction, and the look in his eyes is a terrifying mix between I've been caught and I'm not stopping now. He drops everything, leaving his shit behind, and starts sprinting straight for me, cloth in hand. At this point, I'm too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me in the low-lying woodland with this crazy fuck, and I'm too far away to scream bloody murder. My first instant in a split-second decision is to run towards my neighborhood, and I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack on the ground and sprinting as fast as I could, starting up the hill towards my neighborhood. Judging by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in two with no effort, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Plus, I didn't know what the fuck he had in his hand. All throughout school, I had been the top cross-country and track runner in my entire school. Out of the female and male teams, my running had been my savior a few other let's not meet worthy occasions, but soon into the chase, I knew it wouldn't be enough. This time, this guy was fucking fast as shit, and I could tell he was slowly gaining on me without even looking back. I finally see some fenced-in backyards up ahead, and hoping people are home from work. I start trying to scream help as much as I could, but I was breathless at the time. I make a split decision to start jumping fences over people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills are shittier than his running. The first fence throws him off, but by the second into the next yard, he is on my ass, and I feel him coming insanely close to grabbing my leg. I am shitting myself at this point. I see no cars in driveways, no sign of anyone home, and the only thing that is keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state is thinking that I may not ever see my family or friends again. The next yard belongs to people I know rather well, including their dogs. This house was close to my street.
on the street parallel to mine, and I have come to know their dog rather well since they recently moved in. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I could walk to school with her on the street down the hill to the busy street. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac, and usually when the kids were walking to school, they would put him in the backyard instead of in the front yard, since he would growl and scare the shit out of the kids walking by while he was tied outside. I love animals, so every time we'd walk, I'd talk calmly to him through his menacing "I'll fuck you up" barks. Every time he'd be slightly less vicious to me, until one day the nice people who lived there gave me a treat to give him, and after that the dog was a nice stop on the way to school. The dog's name is Leo. With that next yard and my newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt hope like I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they let him in their backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo saw me frantically running down toward him, he started wagging his tail. Then he looked to the guy chasing behind me, and he started growling. I thought this would be enough to get the guy to fuck off, but no. He started to jump over the fence the second after I did. But then the dog jumped up on his teeth, came so close to his face that the creep fell backwards into the other yard, straight on his ass. I fell into the dog's yard on my ass. The creep and I stared at each other, out of breath for a few seconds, while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was thinking if he could take Leo or not. I prayed the creep didn't have a knife or something. The guy looked angrier than I've ever seen a person, and after a few seconds got up and started running back down the hill where he came. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock and didn't move, until my hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what just went down. The creep and I stared at each other, out of breath for a few seconds, while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was thinking if he could take Leo or not. I prayed the creep didn't have a knife or something. The guy looked angrier than I've ever seen a person, and after a few seconds got up and started running back down the hill where he came. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock and didn't move, until my hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what just went down. My house was close, so I jumped the fence and ran the rest of the way home, and called the cops to investigate and try to find the guy. I gave the best description I could. After coming practically face to face with him, the dude's bag was gone, and so every trace was him too. They found my poor backpack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me they'd keep looking. Never saw the guy again and didn't hear anything more about it, and after calling the office a few times, I gave up. They told me during that time they had received sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, etc., but nothing like mine. Over the past few months, there have been a few missing persons cases, but in a city like that one I'm from, not the best. You can never connect anything like that, for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, the more fucked up it is, and more confused I am. First, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch me into the forest before I had the chance to get away, or before another trail goer possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon on him or anything, except that creepy cloth. And what the hell did he have in his hand? A friend thought it might have been chloroform. But I did research, and it's apparently more a myth that pouring it into a rag and uncovering a person's face causes them to faint quickly. Plus, where the hell would you get it anyway? Thanks to that asshole, I never walked that shortcut anymore without at least 2 friends and pepper spray or some sort of protection. So, sex-trade kidnapper, amateur stalker, serial killer, or whatever the fuck you are, let's never, ever meet again. Leo got a lot of extra feelings when I saw him.
A couple of years back, I lived for about a year and a half in Moscow. I mostly, madly loved that city. I was studying Russian, and naturally, I fell in with a group of my fellow English-Russian students. It didn't do my liver any favors since we went out and sampled the chaotic Moscow nightlife at least once a week. I'm not a massive party animal. I can't stomach going home in the wee hours of the morning all the time, so I would often catch the last train home, rather than go on to the clubs and stay out until 5. A few quick facts for those who are not familiar with Moscow. 1. There are some very strange people in that city. Bless Moscow's little cotton socks. I love the place, but there are some proper oddballs. 2. The last metro trains run at about 1:30 a.m., I think. Unless you catch that, you either have to try your luck with the taxis, or walk, or wait until the morning trains and get in with the commuters. I'm a cheapskate, and getting in the metro was always easier and cheaper. The Moscow metro is legendarily complicated, and weirdly organized, and intimidating. It's also kind of creepy at 1 a.m. Outside the city center, there aren't many people hanging around the stations. When those big, grand, stallionous halls are totally devoid of anyone else, it's freaky, like the setting of some weird, dystopian, futuristic zombie thing or something. Always gave me the heebie-jeebies. I should also add that for some strange reason, Moscovite men seem to think I was a member of the sex industry all the goddamn time. This was mainly a problem in the winter months, because Moscovite women didn't risk the minus temperatures at 2 a.m. Just kidding. Maybe just because, I don't know, I spent most of the time dressed like a Scot of the Antarctic and trying not to faceplant on black ice. None of which screams prostitute to most people, but whatever. So on to the weirdo. I'd been out to the bars with my friends, and since I had planned a big sightseeing the next day, I bailed on going to the clubs and headed home. I had a few friends who lived on the same line, but this night they were all going to have a proper night out. So I thought I would brave the boring metro ride home, alone. Going home started happily, merrily, and drunkenly. I hopped onto a train. It was quiet, but not too quiet. A couple of merrymakers out and about, but I got a seat with loads of space in a relatively quiet car, and with loads of space, I kind of zoned out for a few moments. Our antagonist got on at the next stop. He was a big man, heavy set, but also just generally huge. He stood near the doors. I don't know why, I just kind of ended up spacing out in his direction. I was drunk, okay? But I ended up staring a little bit, not paying attention, just waiting for my stop. Gradually, though, I noticed that he had this pool of pinkish, reddish, watery stuff collecting in drops around his feet. Like, you know, the myoglobin you get from a packet of meat. My brain processed this as blood at first, so I stared like an idiot, wondering if this man was injured or something. When I looked up, I made embarrassing eye contact and realized two things. The liquid was leaking from this shitty, battered-looking backpack he was carrying. Seriously, who carries leaking meat in a backpack? And he was also staring at me. I looked away, and he came to sit in the opposite seat from me, still staring. I only had to wait one more stop for the station I had to change lines at, but it was the most goddamn uncomfortable wait I've had for a long time. He stared at me the whole time with something my brain can't decide was a rape face or a I want to hurt you face, since I was too scared to properly look at him. My station came and I got off the train. Meatman followed, which I shrugged off. Maybe he lives at this stop, I said to myself, to be sure he wasn't following me because he made me massively uncomfortable. I took a very counterintuitive and convoluted path to the platform where I needed to catch the last train at, even at the risk of missing it. Fortunately, the station was quite busy and full of guards for some reason, or I might have freaked out a bit there and then. I genuinely took the most stupid, time-consuming trip to the platform I could think of. I looked over my shoulder a lot, and I kid you not, He followed me every step of the way, step after leaking step. I tried everything to shake this man. When my train arrived, I got onto one car, dived off, and ran into another, running like a lunatic to avoid missing it. He somehow managed to follow me. I pretended that I needed to get off at the next stop, the station before mine. He started to follow, but didn't buy it. All I could think of was, oh my God, I'm going to be killed by the Russian equivalent of the Midnight Meat Train Man. This can't be happening. I studiously avoided even looking at him. I did not want to miss my stop, so I jumped off the train like a crazy person. Again, luck was not on my side, because that asshole must have had the reflexes of a cat. My station was on one of the ones which was generally really quiet, like a fucking tomb, and it creeped me out the best of times. To make things worse, the easiest way home was through one of those convoluted Moscow metro overpasses. I decided to do the stupid thing and ignore this man, just go about my business and hope that he went away. Halfway through the underpass, this man was still following me with his drippy bag and his crazed, unfocused eyes and his weird rape murder face. Dutch courage kicked in. I was pretty spooked by this man, but I was also really, really pissed off. What I did next was stupid, but is a light-hearted end to the story of the scary Moscow Metro man. I wouldn't recommend it. It probably doesn't work on anyone but scary Metro lurkers. I wouldn't try it on anyone or anything else. For example, bears. Please do not try this on bears. I was also really drunk, which is probably why I thought, fuck it, and decided to do this. Aware that this man was still following me and closing in, I turned around and shouted, "If you don't leave me the fuck alone, I will fucking murder you," and other things to that extent, in a drunken mix of Russian and English. I had kind of a very special alcohol and fear-fueled temper tantrum, which involved jumping and flailing like a crazy person, swearing and throwing my shoes at him, you know, out crazy the crazy. Eventually, I managed to get him to piss off enough to make a getaway and put enough distance between us that I managed to lose him. Worth looking like an idiot for, I reckon. I don't know why he was following me or what was in that goddamn bag. Ugh, that leaking shit. Or why he looked so mad. He might have just been drunk maybe, and I know that my imagination takes me down a dark route whenever I think about it. Maybe I was lucky not to be face down in a ditch or something. Maybe he had truly nefarious plans, and I made too much of a hassle to be worth the payoff. Maybe there was something properly nasty in that Mackie-looking backpack. I'll never know, and I don't want to. On the other hand, he was scared off by a drunken woman waving her arms like a helicopter, shouting threats, and throwing her shoes around. So maybe he was just mildly creepy and not a threat at all. Again, I'll never know. But that's the story of the Moscow Meat Man. I hope it wasn't too long.
This happened about 10 years ago when I worked third shift at a gas station in a small town in South Carolina. It's always came up in conversation when anyone mentions intuition, and I think that it's proof that you should never, ever ignore strange feelings. So, I had been working at this station for a few months, had gotten to know all the cops and made a bunch of friends. Throughout most of the week I had a regular crew who would come in and hang out with me. One dude who got off work at around 11 and would come in and hang out for a couple of hours. Another dude, Travis, who owned a strip club and would get in about midnight and hang for a couple of hours. Then there was Danny, and he would pull in after hauling loads between Atlanta and my city and get in around 2:30. He'd hang out with me until about 5, and that's when people would start arriving to fill up before work. So I was never really alone for too long. It helps to mention that all 3 of these dudes carried guns on their person, and I was a pretty young girl, and they took it upon themselves to make sure I wasn't alone. Plus, they were funny as shit, told great stories, and never tried anything on with me. They were pals. But Sundays were always a problem. None of them worked on Sunday nights, and on those occasions when I had to work Sundays, I was always a bit lonesome, but not scared. I had by that time read Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear, and it had changed my life. I stopped worrying about stuff, certain that my intuition would be clouded if I allowed myself to be paranoid or a worrywart. So when I felt weird, I listened. So there was this one evening when I had to work, and even hours before, I had just that feeling. I'd never had it before a shift, not ever, and I worked at a few gas stations previous to this. Side note, gas stations are amazing workplaces. You will see everything there if you work there long enough. Also, dangerous. So I had this feeling, and I just knew I'd better heed it. I called up a friend and asked him if he would roll up in the empty hours at the station and keep me company. I promised him all the free coffee and hot dogs he could eat, and he happily said yes. Well, here we are sitting there. I had gotten all my work done, and we were just chilling inside. It was a cold night. Suddenly, I see this beat-up pickup truck pull in, and I just got out this wave of feeling. This is what I was waiting for. I knew it as clearly as I know my own name. They pulled in and proceeded to drive real slow around the station, and there were 2 dudes inside, craning their necks to see. I mean, it was so obvious they were casing the joint, and I said to my friend, "Hey man, stand up. This is who I was waiting for." He gets up and stands by the door in full badass stance, and I hit the auto locks. Pumps are off too. They do a full circuit, and I can see from the back cab window that they are grimy and desperate looking, and they pull back out onto the road, going in the same direction they had been going initially, refuting any idea that I might have had they were merely turning around. I kept the doors locked till morning, and told my boss about it the next day. She wrote up a description, and we kept it behind the counter, and not 3 days later the store down the street was robbed. There was something about those dudes that I am sure, since the other store's clerk was a male, that they would have done more to me than merely rob me. Truck was probably stolen, and there was no license plate on it, or I would have turned them in. As it was, I was sure to tell the cops the description of the truck and the dudes, but they said themselves the truck was probably stolen, and without a license plate, they were hard-pressed. I wish I'd been able to get more info, because there was something about those guys together that told me that they had done far worse in their lives than rob a gas station. I mean, some things you just know. I can't explain it. I can, and I do hike all over alone. I have travelled cross-country, from Georgia to California alone. I was homeless in LA for months. Alone. I'm not your average chick when it comes to guts. And there have only been a few times in my life when that voice came up and just tells you, you just freaking know. One last, far shorter story. I used to have to walk a mile from the train station to my place, and I had to pass a spot where a girl was snatched and her body found a week later. It was a drugstore. She was ill and had gone in to get some cold meds, and on her way out someone snatched her. I will admit, walking past there, I would get occasionally freaked out. That crime was something of legend in my hood, and since there had been 3 more, not cool at all. But one night, I was walking home from the station and the streets were empty, and I was about to cross over between these 2 buildings. It's a shortcut to get to my street, which is one of the oldest in LA. But a very clear voice said, "No, stay on your side of the street. Cross at Broadway. Don't take the shortcut tonight." It was so clear that I said, "Shit, man, okay," as if I were talking to my mom or something. So I didn't cross. Did my normal thing and happened to look back, and the alley where I was going to go through, there were these 3 dudes sitting there on the ground drinking, just hanging out in a non-residential area that is very, as in a few feet away from an ATM. It was like they were just waiting for a chance to snatch or do something. Dressed in black, young guys. You tell me, who does this? No apartments around. They weren't obviously homeless, just dudes. I was not meant to walk through them, apparently.
So, this happened earlier tonight. My fiance works nights for UPS, so on weeknights, I'm home alone with the dog. We live in a pretty small house, laid out into a large living room, leading into the bedroom, and a tiny kitchen, bathroom, laundry room, and closet, leading off of them. All this means is that you can hear anything that happens from any room in the house. I was watching a movie in the bedroom while I was waiting for a load of clothes to dry. All of a sudden, my dog's ears perk up, like someone is at the door, and starts barking his head off, sticking his head between the curtains. I go to check it out, and nothing is out of place. After a while, he calms down and comes back to the bedroom to lay back down. About 20 minutes later, there is a large crash coming from the front door. I brace myself for seeing the glass broken on the door. I got up, and the door was fine. I decided that I was being irrational, and it was just a box or something that fell over. So I checked the house, but nothing was out of place, and it had to be outside. I called my fiance, and he told me to call the cops and have someone come check it out, since he couldn't leave work yet. When they arrived, we checked out the yard and around the house. Nothing overturned, nothing weird. Except that I noticed that both of the trash cans were sitting straight up. One of our trash cans was tipped over earlier that day when I was outside to take out the trash. Someone had knocked over our other trash can and then set them both back upright before fleeing. The cops informed me that someone a few blocks over had just phoned in a peeping Tom earlier tonight, and they were patrolling the area. We'll be getting thicker curtains for the house, and to the peeping Tom in my yard, let's not meet.
My sister never had great taste in men, and during the autumn of 2012, she started dating a man named Marco. He was her age, 26, and worked as a chef. My sister and I are very much alike, but also each other's opposites. Identical twins, but with two very different sets of personalities. She is trusting and fun-loving, social and bubbly. I'm a total introvert, in love with my books. We are very close though, always been, as I assume most twins are. It was when she first brought Marco to a family dinner at my parents' place that I noticed some of the less than charming cracks in his otherwise well-kept mask. It was subtle at first, but it was there. The signs of a controlling and jealous mind. An ever so brief hint of contempt that dances across his face every time she paid attention to someone else, or when it became evident that she was much more intelligent and well-read than he. He was very good looking though, I'll give him that. And I guess that's the veil that kept my sister from seeing the truth. A wolf in sheep's clothing. He was fit, tall, with broad shoulders and green eyes. A charming smile and a confident posture. Soon she stopped calling me. She called me on a daily basis before. Then the family dinners thinned out to almost nothing. She started wearing clothes she wouldn't normally pick out herself. I tried talking to her, but at first she wouldn't listen. Because when he wasn't a controlling asshole, he's the love of her life. Yeah, I told her. Psychos are weird like that. Anyway, one afternoon, she phoned me up. I was standing in line at the grocery store, but what she told me made me drop everything and rush out to the car. She called me from a cafe, and what she told me was chilling. They had had a fight. A verbal fight that had escalated until he left her home and slammed the door. Later he had returned with a new car. He had sold the old two-door thing and bought a larger one, an old Volvo V70. He had stared at her and said, "This car's got a trunk so large that I could easily fit a body in there, just so you know." At that point, she had gone into the bathroom, started to draw a bath, and climbed out the window. Where I live, this kind of threat isn't taken seriously by police. If you haven't been hit and got the marks to prove it, you get nothing. So we decided that she would leave town and take that job offer she had been interested in, but turned down because he didn't want her to drive over an hour to work each day. She would go stay with a friend, Joe, who lived just under an hour from the new workplace. but 2 hours from her current city. Joe was an old childhood friend and had never been introduced to Marco. It felt safe. I had phone contact with her every day to make sure things were okay. She seemed happy again, and I felt that the danger was over. Until that day, when I was out running. I had finished my run and returned to the parking lot. I usually had the car key on top of one of the tires, and as I reached down to grab it, he put his arm around my throat, tight enough to cause breathing difficulties. One twin is just as good as the other, he whispered, and started dragging me away from the car. Your sister caused this. It's her fucking fault. She'll never see you again. That's the punishment. He mumbled in my ear as he moved me towards his car. Not the Volvo, but still a car the right size. I was panicking, and despite my struggling and kicking and desperate squirming, he had no problem keeping his hold on me, and it was terrifying to realize how much stronger he was than I. I'm a fit woman. I run and fence. I have competed in CrossFit, and I did all I could to fend him off, but it didn't help. That's when I used my one free arm to stab the car key in his inner thigh. I aimed for something more painful, but his hold on me made it impossible to move enough. It stunned him enough to loosen his grip a bit, and I used that short window to crush the tiny bones in his foot with my terrain running shoes. He still managed to knock me down, but was then interrupted by a team of cross-country runners, and he fled the scene. My sister came home to witness against him, and she had a lot to say once she started talking. Together, we and the guys from the cross-country running team convinced the court to lock him up. Not for as long as I would have liked, but still.
I've been going to this campground near Lake Berryessa for years now. It's a Hawaiian-style place, but I won't mention the name for the sake of the other parties involved. In 2014, I was there with my aunt, uncle, and cousin for a few days. Not my immediate family as usual. Some other cousins and family friends were around too. Anyways, I was chilling in the lodge area, charging my phone and watching the documentary Kidnapped for Christ on it using the Wi-Fi there. My cousin and uncle entered the lodge consistently to check in on me, as they were at a nearby pool area. I eventually went to the bathroom. I was in the stall for a good minute before another person entered with me and went into the next stall over with unfamiliar shoes on. Suddenly, a phone slid under from the space between the stalls and the floor. In the notes app, "Want head," was typed. I called out for my cousin, thinking he was playing some joke on me. I slid the phone back under. The phone came back again, now with the message repeated, coupled with a wink face. I decided to explore it while I still had it. Looked through the contacts. No names I recognized, but I thought it could be college friends of my cousin. So, as a final test, I checked the Instagram app. This phone was logged into the account of a total stranger. I realized very shortly this was not my cousin playing a joke. I took in my surroundings carefully. His shoes, colors, his profile pic displaying his glasses, grayish hair, double chin, his bio claiming he attended San Francisco Academy of Arts. I slid the phone back under and waited it out. He exited the stall and stood in front of mine.
"So?"
he asked. "No, please get out."
"Are you sure?"
"Yeah, just get the fuck out of here."
"Okay,"
he said, almost amused, and slowly lurched out. I finished up and stood up to exit the stall. As I washed my hands, I gazed around, paranoid, expecting he might be camping out in here to pounce on me. I exited, and as I walked through the lodge, I recognized him from his profile pic and the crack in the stall. I looked over at him, and he looked up briefly, and I swear he kind of mugged and shrugged his shoulders, looking back down at his phone, as if to say, "Oh well, your loss." I calmly walked over to my uncle and cousin at the shuffleboard table. The lodge was mostly empty. Don't look now, but see that guy sitting over there in the corner? They looked past me. No. I turn and see the back door of the lodge shut. I explain my scenario to them. I watch him through the windows stupidly walk full circle around and try to wait it out in the crowded pool area. I ended up telling my other family members and staff there. They get the local sheriffs down there. They interview me, get my story and descriptions. They escort him out of the pool area, interview him separately. My descriptions of the overweight, gray-haired, glasses-wearing man matched up perfectly, down to his Instagram account profile pic and bio. The sheriffs there were friendly but barely cared, saying the guy was just an openly gay man looking for a weekend hookup who was totally unaware I was underage. Despite me having seen him around the lodge that day and speaking directly to him via the stalls, in which case he should have backed off. They even told my mom that because I was 15 at the time, in 3 years this wouldn't even be a crime. He was barred from the campground. My family was telling me how brave it was and how thankful they were I called this creep out on his bullshit. I thought nothing of it. I wasn't even all that afraid, just really shocked. As in all my years at that place and in the years since, nothing like that has ever happened to me. I was interviewed again by more sympathetic sheriffs later on. I'm not sure whatever legal actions were taken against him.
Late night phone calls. This happened 2 years ago. I was still living in a small apartment with my 2 older sisters. We're all in our early 20s in a shady area here in the Philippines. And by shady, I mean neighbors who use drugs, gangsters roaming around like they own the streets, riots in the middle of the night. Yeah, you get the picture. I know that isn't a good place for 3 girls to live in, but we really didn't have a choice. Rent was really cheap, and money was tight. So, on to the story. My sisters were already asleep that night. I was still up studying for upcoming finals when our landline suddenly rang. I was kind of annoyed more than puzzled as to why on earth is someone still calling in the middle of the night. I didn't move to answer the call and just focused harder on what I was reading. The caller would hang up after 5 rings and then try again. It was already to focus at the time because the ring was getting into my head, so I promised myself to answer the next call. So then the phone rang again. I answered it immediately. I asked who the caller is, but there was no answer. All I could hear was heavy breathing and a random noise on the same street. I shrugged it off, hung up, and went back to studying. The call stopped for once. I could finally study in peace. After several minutes, I got sleepy and prepared to go to bed. Then the phone freaking rang again. I ignored it and continued cleaning my stuff. The call went to voicemail and the caller left a message.
Look outside. I'm outside your door. I'm outside as I speak to you right now. Just take a look at me outside.
And then he ended the call. The voice was breathy, but obviously the caller was a guy. He uttered those words like a sing-song voice, like he was a maniac on the loose. I was creeped the fuck out nevertheless. I woke up my sisters and told them what happened. We were all creeped out. We don't know what to do, since there isn't a 911 hotline here in the Philippines. You could call anytime, nor a team of policemen would respond immediately. So we just secured the locks and stayed awake all night, holding one another with knives at hand, Fortunately, nothing happened, and the creeper didn't call again, but that was enough to make us move the fuck out of that place.
So I got this call from my best friend one Valentine's night. He had fallen out with his wife and needed a date for the cinema. I went to pick him up in my Fiat Punto. I loved that car. It was a really nice drive. We headed to the pictures to see the Woman in Black movie with the guy from Harry Potter in it. It was really scary. I had never been to see a movie like it. Everyone was jumping in their seats and screaming. It really added to the atmosphere of the film. By the time we came out, it was late, just before midnight. I rang my wife just to tell her that the movie was great and that I would be home in an hour. My friend Steve nipped out his cigarette and we got in the car to head home. We turned on the motorway, only to find it was closed for work that would start in the morning. Steve said he knew of another road that we could take home called the Beehive. It was pretty quiet country lane type of road, the type popular with kids in their souped up cars with noisy exhausts. Up ahead to the right, I spotted a car with its headlights switched off, and standing to the side was a tall, well-built baldy man with glasses. He was holding an orange bag. As we passed him, he glared at us, as if we shouldn't have been there. I told Steve I didn't like the look of him, and made a joke about breaking down next to him, and that I was pleased that we didn't because my car had sounded a bit rough lately. The cosmic joker must have been listening because, mere seconds later, the car stuttered, followed by a scraping noise. The exhaust was dragging along the road. Fuck. We made it to a small town called Backworth and pulled into a new housing development and parked up. I rang for roadside assistance to find we would be stuck for the next hour or two, and whilst waiting, we noticed an estate car driving by several times. We joked about the man we saw and how it was probably his wife's head in the orange bag, and he was away to bury it in a field. The estate car passed us again, and this time glaring at us was the bald man. In the passenger seat, he had brought a friend. He looked massive, almost like a gorilla. He slowed the car right down and passed us, but was turning around to come back for another look. And just then, we saw our recovery vehicle from the other direction. It must have been enough to put the two men off. Either that, or they saw we had no interest in whatever it was they were up to, because we never saw them again. The recovery man patched us up, and we were on our way. What was in the orange bag? Was it really his wife's head? Whatever happened, we were just pleased to be away. So, to the baldy man with the orange bag and his gorilla-sized friend, let's not meet again.